Welcome, everyone, and happy December. And I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. And I'm Rob Grimes, the CEO of the International Food and Beverage Technology Association, the IFBTA. And I want to welcome everybody to our December webinar. And it's a special one today. It's featuring Scale Computing, who's one of our key members. And we're going to have a discussion on streamlining IT for the food and beverage sector. And we're going to specifically talk about edge computing, drives efficiency, simplicity, everything that's on the screen, and probably a bigger conversation than that, because this is a very important subject, and we're glad that you joined us today. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. So this session is going to go for an hour. You are going to be able to ask questions during it, and you want to use the Q&A tab down at the bottom. And if you'll just put your questions in there, we actually are going to try to answer some of the questions online. And if we don't, I may actually tee those up for my co-hosts and panelists today so that we can actually discuss it live. But please put them on. And if we don't get to your question and there are some additional answers we can provide, we will certainly continue to do that afterwards. The other piece that you need to know is that the session is being recorded, which you of course already know, but it's recorded so that the IFBTA can go ahead and post it afterwards. And of course, Scale will post it as well. So with that, it is an important subject. We only have an hour to do it. And so let's get started. So first of all, let me first introduce Dave Demlow and Mike Lyon, and welcome to our webinar today. So the place to start in a welcome would be a quick background of who you are, what you do, and then let's just do an introduction about Scale.
Sure. Mike, you want to introduce yourself first, and I'll go and go into the Scale introduction.
Yeah, my name is Mike Lyon. So I'm an enterprise solutions architect. I've been with Scale since 2011. But really what my main role is to work with larger organizations that are traditionally horizontally distributed with hundreds or thousands of sites looking to deploy new and agile infrastructure. So I help to get everyone acquainted with the product, introduce our technology, and really find ways for it to fit in terms of sizing and deployment.
You're the guy that makes it happen.
That's right.
Right? You got to do the magic behind all this and make it work. So, Dave?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Dave Demlow. I'm the Vice President of Product Strategy and Innovation at Scale Computing. I've been with the company since 2010, so a lot of evolution in IT and in the markets that we serve and so forth. And I work a lot kind of in between the product team, sales and marketing, our engineering, our support, basically on how we can leverage our edge computing technologies, which we'll go into and define and so forth, for a wide variety of market solutions and use cases.
So you guys are ideal panelists, by the way, because from what I get here is one person, you're not only working with the customers and figuring out how the solutions are going to work, but you're also working on the strategy of what's going to come in the future. And so this conversation today is not just about where we are today, but really where we're going. And then Mike, you of course got to make it happen. So maybe we can go ahead and do the overview, because there's a number of terms that have been used here, and I'd like to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So you want to start with defining there you go.
Sure. Yeah. So let's talk about Scale as a company. So we do work with customers in many industries. Some names certainly in the food and beverage space there, but a wide variety of different vertical markets around retail, transportation, and some of the commonalities that you'll see there are these are generally organizations that have lots of locations. Are running mission critical applications out in these locations. So for example, an interesting one outside the food service space is Northern Marine. They have applications running on ocean going vessels, and there's no IT people there that can care and feed for the infrastructure or the applications. So they need very resilient self-managing infrastructure. They need to maximize uptime for those critical applications. And ultimately, they need to, build a very resilient infrastructure. Not at all uncommon to what you would face in a retailer or in a quick serve restaurant, or
even more so in restaurants, because if you lose because of all the connectivity, which I'm sure you're going to go into, you are out of business.
Exactly. Right. So so we do have this technology that's very horizontal, but there is kind of this common, these common needs, these common problems. And so one of them, which we mentioned in the intro and in the title, is edge computing. And we have a very simple definition, what we mean by edge computing. And it's basically any place you're running mission critical application infrastructure that's outside the four walls of a data center or outside a public cloud data center, for example. So, one of the fundamental reasons that you would do that might be, to bring the data, to bring the application experience as close as possible to the ultimate users of that data, the processes, the machinery, the workflows that are generating that data. But that's really kind of, and there's a wide variety we'll go into, in the food and beverage industry, what some of those things are. But it's clear that you can't just go and put everything into the public cloud for
But it actually probably becomes, it's funny because my initial reaction is I haven't heard the word data center used. It's like sort of in a long time. I know it exists. I know it's out there, right? But if you think about that, almost everything that we're using in food service that is operational is probably occurring outside the data center.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which means you're covering the whole thing.
Right. Yeah, and there may be, applications is also an interesting word. We don't really define it, but the days of, kind of monolithic applications where all the processing is one thing in one place are also kind of changing. You've got, things where you may have a on-premises front end, like to your point of sale, but you're still processing and uploading some of the data to some cloud service, things like that. So the concept of an application is evolving, being more distributed. But kind of one of the key things here is that, why not just put everything in the cloud? The network connection being the largest point of failure, providing increased latency for many of these applications and many of these new types of applications that we're seeing driving new business user experiences, the latency required to, for example, process a video stream, make a decision that, oh, this is a customer XYZ's license plates going through drive-through, and provide those very real-time user.
I want to point out something about this slide and something you just said. People have talked, for instance, about a drive-through looking at license plates. That's probably one of those strategy things that's yet to come, that people have tried it, hasn't worked out before, but it's absolutely coming. But the thing I get out of this chart is I get the key words that are here. I get this. But at the same time, I'm looking at some of the things on the chart, and I'm not so sure we always consider that all of these are part of a connected environment. So, and really is when you're talking, robots are starting to come in here, the VR, and the AR is sort of new, but training out there. Obviously, we understand workforce, kiosks. So I understand the things on the left. We don't always tie, maybe the hotel industry ties in the environmental sensors, but more and more the restaurant industry. And then all of that connected kitchen equipment. In reality, what this is an eye-opener slide that's telling us that either now or in the future, everything is actually connected.
Sure. Yeah. And all of these will require, IT resources, most of them, that we put up here intentionally. You wouldn't want to put in a public cloud and rely on, that resiliency in the network, rely on the latency for a round trip to send video streaming data, get responses back and so forth. These are experiences that do require on-premises IT operations.
So if you think about this in this way, so again, there's a lot of things here. The other thing that comes to mind is, I don't know, it's like a deja vu kind of thing, a back to the future, because we spent all this time for years talking about on-prem, and then we went to the cloud, which was the key word because the applications went to the cloud. Then what's happened is it seems like it's brought us back on-prem because there's so many different things that can only reside on the premises. If you take a look at this, and by the way, I'm not ignoring that connected consumer thing there, because when the connected consumer comes on-prem, they're part of it as well. And maybe, we got workforce management over there, but we got connected employees as well. So it really is something that has to be protected down at the unit level, outside of the four walls of the data center, but inside the four walls of your operation.
Absolutely.
So are there any things, just out of curiosity, are there any things here as we start to think about, what it really looks like as we go forward, the store tomorrow? I mean, what's that look like? Because the industry is like moving forward, so more things are going to be added to it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's kind of drill into that. And we've worked with a lot of early adopters and customers that are in some cases doing pilots of some of these new on-prem edge experiences. But for many of them, and it's really surprising, for many, the store of tomorrow is here today. And so we are seeing a lot of these applications from the previous slide, some that we'll drill into a little more, that are actually being deployed. And yeah, we're working with customers that are deploying robotics and, in food processing and assembly lines. I mean, kind of the classic things of, digital signage, inventory management. Those are pretty key. The IoT type of applications, beyond just, your normal things that everybody, sees and recognizes, the point of sale solutions, the video surveillance, leveraging information and doing analysis on those video feeds versus just keeping them there for loss prevention or things
Yeah, I
like
think people forget that there's an awful lot of data that's collected that we actually don't use.
right,
And,
right,
the video feed thing, that's very interesting because I've been talking to some people about this, that once you have captured it, you start doing things like planograms and time motion studies and where the equipment goes. But also that can show, the traffic patterns. Maybe we learned that from retail, but I think people maybe don't realize how much information is actually available to them, right on site. But at the same time, how much, if it's available to them, it's also available to lots of places, and it
exactly.
obviously has to be secured, controlled, and get to the right place and be connected, right?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and it's critical data. And kind of where we, are working with customers is, you want to be able to adopt these applications. You certainly don't want information technology to be the barrier, in your business or in providing these kinds of experiences. But, point solutions, kind of the old way of, well, let's deploy this new application. Well, we need to define, we need to figure out what hardware we need for it. All right, we're gonna need some new servers. We're gonna need some new networking, things like that. We're going to go procure that and order that and roll those out to the stores. And, 2 years or 3 years later, we've got this new application ready to go. But, the ship has sailed in terms of that. Point solutions, are just lengthy to deploy, cost a lot of money. And what we're working with customers are in this edge computing space is basically providing a unified platform that is designed to support all these kinds of applications and scale out as your needs change. So whether that's rapidly deploying some new application, having the resources kind of like in the cloud. You don't, when you want to deploy a new application in the public cloud, the resources are there, they're ready, they're available. You can quickly spin up new applications. You can quickly grow an application to account for surges in demand, things like that. We're helping customers provide that same kind of resiliency and experience on their premises, and be able to take advantage of rapid application deployment. Some of the technologies that are part of that, which we'll talk a little bit more about, are things like virtualization. So where you can virtualize what would have been a physical server box or physical PC box, run that as a virtual machine on resilient infrastructure. Things like containerization, which is a specific way of deploying applications rapidly. It's often you'll hear a terminology called cloud native because these methods were first developed and deployed for being able to rapidly deploy and update applications across multiple cloud providers, hybrid cloud providers. We're taking and helping customers utilize those kinds of deployment methods, even in their edge locations, and doing it across thousands of locations, which is actually much harder than deploying to a big centralized public cloud.
Well, as I look at this slide, and I think what you're doing is a good job of taking us from the slide before, which is saying too much to manage, but what you're doing is showing how you're helping to manage it. Now, the thing that comes to mind on this is a couple things. First of all, there are many different suppliers who are involved in providing this. So where do you fit in regards to the other suppliers that somebody has, either existing or ones that they're going to go to in the future?
Sure. And this is part of the reason for, us joining, the organization is to, solidify and formalize some of those ecosystem partnerships. But, a simple technology answer is this is where virtualization and containerization come in. All of your application vendors know how to deploy their applications on, for example, let's say a Windows operating system or a Linux operating system. So we can take multiple applications, package those up through virtualization, containerization, and deploy all those kinds of applications side by side on one resilient platform. And that's kind of what you see in the picture here on the right. This is an example of our HE100 series. That's actually a little mini data center right there that somebody's holding in their hand with resiliency, with failover, with the ability to run multiple applications. Mike is going to get into that in much more detail of how we do some of those things. But that's kind of the key thing here is that we basically let you provide a single platform that is designed to support all different kinds of applications with different needs, different operating systems, different connectivity to the network, and do that in a secure and resilient.
It's funny. I look at this picture and I think to myself, you called it a mini data center. In reality, what we're doing is we're creating, it's not so much on-prem, but you're actually bringing the data center on-prem to do these things. And then, of course, outside, just to quote you guys, but right outside the four walls of the data center. So outside the four walls of what a 4-inch squared box, are all of these parts and components that are coming together. And so if I take that box and I put it in the middle of that circle in there, then what we're saying is outside the walls of that data center, these are all the parts and pieces that are connected, yet they're inside of the building. And then, of course, you have that connection outside the building.
Exactly. Right. And that's your edge computing platform. That's, exactly. So.
Well, so we actually had somebody ask us a question about that one. Security is becoming, data security is becoming even more and more of a concern. So, what are the security concerns of edge devices within existing networks?
Sure. Yeah. Security is obviously critical. Mike is going to go into our product line in more specific, and he can highlight some of
Well, so why don't we do that? Because maybe we were intentionally teeing up Mike. So Mike, you're up. So why don't you go into what things look like both for the possibility and the opportunity today, and then we'll actually have a conversation about tomorrow.
Yeah, perfect. So if you think about really what we were trying to do is answer a question. And that question was, what if you could deploy a highly available on-premises private cloud without the traditional cost and complexity that we think about with traditional infrastructure? And we wanted to try and figure out, looking at the challenges that we're facing, especially in the food and beverage industry, of trying to fit traditional IT infrastructure down into the needs of the environment that we're running, right? To be small scale, but also, really that within that straightforward question is providing something that is simple, that's scalable, and that's highly available without having to reinvest a lot of time in training and expertise and become fluent in a new platform, but something that is very approachable and easy to use.
It has to be scalable.
Yes, it has to be scalable, both vertically and horizontally, because when you're talking about managing at scale, not just the deployment, but I'll talk about that in a little bit, is how do we manage at scale? And that's really what we've built with our platform, is it's really tailored to the challenges that we see in our IT environments, especially in our industry, where scalability and those edge computing needs really line up perfectly. So whether it's a network of restaurants, production facilities, distribution centers, we've got one platform that can simplify the entire deployment, providing a unified platform that's also scalable, like you mentioned. So, virtualization, it's often synonymous with complexity. We want to make the concept of managing multiple vendors, of dealing with hardware silos, software silos, making sure they all interoperate together. That's a challenge. With our platform, we eliminate that complexity with one on-prem private cloud solution, a very intuitive interface that simplifies management tasks, even for people who are not IT experts, right? And that's where we get fleet manager capability.
Make it plug and play.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to make it so that there is a very low learning curve, not a high hurdle to get going, even from a day one perspective. So that way we can do rapid deployment across locations, allowing you to scale your operations quickly without any disruptions. The other key part is being highly available. Downtime is the enemy of everything because it kills our revenue, right? We need to be able to transact. That's our most important thing. And that's why we wanted to build a platform that was natively highly available, that was fault tolerant, that provided clustering technology, automating failover, minimizing and eliminating disruptions without any manual intervention required. But like you mentioned, most importantly, it's these capabilities come without a steep learning curve. So you don't need to train your
Wait,
team.
just a second here. So if you're saying without intervention required, what you're actually saying is that the system is actually self realizing where those faults are, making those corrections for you, and you probably and your customers probably don't notice that it's going on, but it takes care of the issue.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have an AI ops enabled management platform. So on the back end, the cluster is self-healing. It's checking itself out. It's optimizing itself, but that doesn't require you to configure that behavior or become an expert in managing all the optics of those different components.
So we can hire people at the operation level who know how to do operations. They don't have to be computer technicians.
Exactly. And when we talk about fleet management, it really is an operations-centric platform. But also, enabling scalability because we don't have the ability to predict the future. Our IT crystal balls are always cloudy. So that's where scalability really is important because you can start small, and as you need to add applications, add workloads, you can very easily grow by just adding additional nodes, additional appliances without having to overhaul and rip and replace everything. So it's giving you the agility.
I'm sort of guessing that this is due to the advancements in technology for our industry over the last few years, because not everybody was on unified sort of platforms or how they were building what they were doing or communicating 10 years ago when we were still trying to debate, are we going cloud or not? But today, what you're saying is that those platforms and other applications that are being offered that we don't even know about today, what we do know is how they may sit, how they may ride, and how they may work together. And so you're built to be able to anticipate that. So let them go choose what they want and put it in there, and it's going to work.
Exactly. We can never future-proof anything, but we want to make sure that you've got the ability to accommodate any new initiatives that come down, whether it's tomorrow or a year and a half from now.
Great. So if you take a look at that, you mentioned something about fleet manager, I think it was. Can you go into that? Oh, there you go.
Yep. So, being able to simplify and manage a large scale deployment, it's going to require one unified pane of glass, right? I hate that term because it's such a cliche, but and that's what we've tried to do is simplifying that IT management, is centralizing the management for all the deployments. So it's about providing one tool to make your entire infrastructure management feel intuitive, to feel scalable, to feel easy to use. And it's managing the entire life cycle of the infrastructure from the initial deployment, we call zero touch provisioning, all the way down to the future of replacing hardware in the field. And zero touch provisioning is a term that often gets co-opted, and there's so often some sort of catch or caveat or asterisk that's associated with it that makes it not truly zero touch. And we really have a practical, real world solution to that with our zero touch provisioning. And the idea is that we can deploy the systems without anyone have to physically touching those once they land. So you don't have to have any smart hands remotely configuring. They literally need to get unboxed, connected to the network, and then the platform's going to automatically handle the rest. So it's going to communicate
Sorry, are you
to fleet
saying,
management.
let me make sure I clarify that. So
Yeah.
I'm going to use a real example that's actually was on an earlier chart that you showed. So let's say I decide I'm going to go ahead and now deploy kiosks. Is it basically as much as getting those kiosks installed, which does take some hands, and then just plugging it in? And it's not, I wouldn't call it self-healing, but it's self-realizing what it has and then putting it together?
Exactly. So it would be a matter of unboxing. In this case, I'm just using a small form factor device, but I just need to get connected to power, connect to network, and it's automatically configured to reach out to fleet manager. And whether it's a single node or you're deploying a cluster, to configure itself into a system automatically without you having to connect a monitor and keyboard and physically interface with it at all.
So that actually really does mean, to some extent, that the installer can just plug in and do it, but they don't have to configure. They don't have to know more about it. They just have to make sure that it's installed properly. If it's something like a kiosk or drive-through or digital signage was on your map, and all those pieces. But because everything else resides and is brought together, the system is going to know what it needs to put together to make it work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it
And
can
this
So,
ensure
so wait, so how
consistent
do you do
deployment.
that to me implies a lot of partnerships here, because that means you have to have partnerships, first of all, with getting into the unit, the network management, and then once you're in the unit, to each of the different things, those devices that are there. Plus, you've got, partnerships with the software side as well. So you guys actually have to have a lot of partnerships because you're not doing all that yourself. You're making it work.
Right. And we're trying to unify all those, like you mentioned, the different components of hardware and software, just to be able to provide a box, whether it's small form factor or large form factor, that can enable that simple deployment.
So through the one thing that what you have on the screen right now is really, this is sort of, so I see, by the way, I see tens, hundreds, thousands of locations. You know what that implies to me? That this is also great for emerging brands that are growing, that they can actually put this in up front, and it actually would allow them to expand much quicker, because the idea of deployment, even with an unsophisticated franchisee or licensee, to connect to their systems is going to be much easier here, because it really is, here's the box, put it in, your your localized data center, and it's going to work. And so it allows you actually to configure and bring up locations much quicker than the old days as well.
Very much so. I like to use the term deployment velocity because it really is important to being able to speed up not just the deployment of actually getting the system out and stood up, but even going beyond that and working to provide the automation to, if you have to convert existing platforms or workloads, maybe it's a physical box you need to virtualize, going beyond just that stand up and configure, but then let's get the workloads brought over as well.
So if I can make this a little bit personal for you, Mike, since you seem to have the responsibility to make it happen, so your team must go in, really understand the person's operations, but you need to talk about, where they're going, not just where they are, to understand how to configure it. Are there some tips, that you would give to people to using your tools? Are there some tips that you would actually give to them in deployment strategy, that you're talking about, that work really well when you're thinking ahead, especially if you're not a tech person?
First and foremost, and the two kind of go hand in hand. One is don't overbuild, and two is it's a sizing exercise, right? One of the principal beauties of our product is the fact that you can easily and non-disruptively scale your system. The shipping company that Dave mentioned actually is doubling their deployment and going from 3 nodes to 6 nodes in their ships. And that's not going to require any downtime. That's literally the process we talked about before with zero touch provisioning. So it's very easy to add for the future. You don't have to overbuy up front because, again, we don't always have a perfect roadmap of what's going to happen from a technology perspective within the next 12 months.
No, nobody has that. The consumers don't even know it, but they're the ones that drive it.
But the other side of that is, if you have a set of applications today, and you're looking at pivoting to something like microservices, I would definitely start looking at platforms that have that capability. A lot of applications, even off the shelf ones today, are starting to go down that path from a microservices perspective. That's going to make deploying applications at scale even easier. Um, and then, yeah, don't get on the hype of one point solution in one application, because, like Dave mentioned, that really does add substantial challenges. When oftentimes the solutions are just asking for a specific, I need 4 vCPU, I need 8 gigs of RAM, I need some storage, right? I need these resources. They just need that, and we can give them that from a private cloud.
Right. So, Dave, since he's teeing you up for this one, I assume that the two of you talk from time to time. And since you're the strategy guy, you also have to try to predict the trends of the future, because that early slide you had here talked about opportunities for the future, right? And growth. So, we did have somebody ask us about what are the trends, and this is a great question to ask anybody, but what are the trends that you're seeing and anticipating operators are going to be trying out in the next year or 2 years or 3 years, that when you're having coffee with Mike over there, that you guys are getting together and saying, hey, listen, we need to be prepared for this because this is coming into the industry. So what are the trends that you see?
Yeah. Well, we've hit on several of them. I mean, a lot of it is around well, AI, machine learning, computer vision. So leveraging, we hit on leveraging probably the video data that's already there that's not being well utilized, and extending that to new applications. Um, so a lot of things around there kind of tied to that is those tend to be more dynamic and hybrid type of applications. So, for example, it's very common pattern to, you know, uh, do what's called AI inferencing on the edge. So you're not actually building new models and, but you're doing the detection, you're analyzing the data, making, microsecond level inferencing decisions, recommendations, to, hey, suggest this item, for this customer based on their previous orders or, their license plate going through drive through, those kinds of things. So a lot of applications around that, a lot of, I guess, other areas in terms of like IoT, again, it's all about gathering data telemetry and then making, turning that into useful information and making decisions. So
what about new revenue centers and ways of doing business? For instance, we're starting to see, well, there may be two subjects here. One might be the convergence between different industries, like C-stores that are putting in restaurants. Okay, so you have new technologies coming into an old technology space. And I don't mean C-stores are old technology, but they run on certain technologies that are not what are used in food and beverage. So this solution, putting them together, is going to make that more seamless and happen. But the second one, when I start looking at things like micro markets or vending, those are operations too and need to be plugged in as well. And they may be within the four walls, outside the four walls, so there's other new pieces of equipment that have to be connected as well, like vending and like micro markets. So how does that all fit into the future as you see it?
Yeah. I mean, it does basically, come down to building a platform to run applications that you don't know what those applications are necessarily going to be tomorrow, or like Mike said, what resources, exactly they need, but building a platform that lets you expand as they're needed. And I will say, customers that deploy our stuff do have enough spare capacity there to handle failover, for example. If a node dies, we're going to automatically, self-heal and keep their applications running. So there's some excess capacity. We actually do not encourage customers, like, don't try to anticipate what you're going to need in 3 years, because you're going to be wrong. It's like, and you can expand it, but you do want to have enough excess capacity so that if you do get the emergency, I mean, COVID's an interesting example for so many things that, the world changed instantly, and the companies that were prepared to rapidly deploy new applications, in days or, weeks, not months or years, really had a key advantage there. So, you know, having that basically having that solid platform to deploy the new applications, but they all tend to be around data collection, data generation, making, instantaneous business decisions, customer experience types of things.
So as somebody grows then, and Mike, this is probably for you, but as somebody grows, how does scale provide the scalability to grow with them? You know, because you're really not a solution. They have to, okay, great. So we're going to go ahead and talk about, but these are a number of different platforms, I guess, that will help you to grow either within your unit, as you add more and more technologies to it, or actually adding other units. So you want to explain what this is about?
Yeah, so just to answer your original question, when someone's at a growth inflection point, they do need to scale up and they do need to add. Again, that's really just a sizing exercise and saying, okay, are we looking to add? Do we need more storage capacity? Do we need more cores? Because one of the other nice things about the platform is if I deploy 3 nodes of a, X CPU, Y memory, Z storage config, I'm not locked into that configuration in perpetuity. So if I need to add another node and I'm going to be needing to accommodate additional storage, then maybe it's a new video or surveillance app, right? I can add in another node to the cluster that's going to have additional storage larger than the existing ones are. So we're extremely flexible in terms of growth. And like Dave said, it's better off to not overbuy, because we also size for failover, right? We want to make sure everything can run in a degraded state. But really, what we're showing here is just a continuum of different hardware offerings we have, from the very small, so the small form factor devices, that 4x4 small form factor micro server, if you will, all the way up to a traditional 2U x86 rack mount server with hundreds of terabytes of storage and 2 terabytes of RAM and 100 cores and everything in between. And the unique part about that is it's the exact same software image that runs on all those platforms.
Do you see, first of all, this is not going to take a lot of space, for sure, because we know that space is a premium and people are trying to move their offices actually, out of offices, right? But also, do you think that there's going to be a situation where we start clustering, where, we may have certain cluster devices that are handling multiple units? I mean, I could certainly see that happening in a food court, in a shopping center, in an airport. I could see that, where you'd be able to scale up and use one technology in there. But what happens if somebody has multiple locations in an area? Would they be able to do that?
Very easily, and that's very easily managed with fleet managers. So it's not going to feel like you have dozens or hundreds of different individual sites that you're managing. It's just going to feel like one cohesive deployment. But if it came down to resources and you didn't want to have, a dozen small clusters and I wanted to have 3 or 4 larger ones, you could very easily consolidate those. And again, it's really just a matter of resource balancing, right? Do I want to have fewer larger clusters or a group of smaller clusters that are easy to grow and manage?
And you guys are in multiple industries as well. I mean, I know we talked about the marine piece, but as you think about it, with more and more, the shopping malls are still out there, but the airports and the travel plazas and stadiums and arenas and theme parks, those are pretty complex environments, and each one has its own nodes and it has its own operations in there. But really, that fleet manager really gives them a great view and a way to scale up and handle the whole environment rather than separate clusters of individual systems.
Yes. We don't want it to feel like it's the pain point of having dozens or hundreds or thousands of endpoints. We want it to just feel like one deployment, again, with self-healing, AI-enabled, highly available clusters that are providing an on-prem private cloud. And again, just like as if you were to log into a typical cloud provider and see your deployment, that's what Fleet Manager is giving you.
So we did have somebody, by the way, I know we've mentioned, Dave, you mentioned IoT, you mentioned AI, and Mike just mentioned AI as well. So, how does the edge computing enable that? In other words, to make it work better, inside the 4 walls? Well, what is it doing to, to move that along and enable and make it really work?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of aspects, but the key is being able to do that AI inference piece, which is making those split-second decisions, recommendations close to the users, close to the customers, close to the machinery. If it's an IoT kind of real-time application, which requires doing the processing in the store, running the applications in the store. And I guess another common thing about all these is those applications tend to be fairly dynamic. I mean, if nothing else, it's we have better AI models and we need to deploy those out to thousands of stores. And that's where, kind of the end-to-end single platform from Fleet Manager out to, the edge in on-premises deployment is really critical, that we can help facilitate all of that, from cloud down to the edge location, and let them rapidly deploy new versions of the applications, new AI models, as well as, facilitating the on-prem data collection that, ultimately has to feed things back up to maybe a public cloud where they're, enhancing the models and things like that. So it's kind of a whole ecosystem there.
Yeah, but it's moving, fairly quickly,
Yes.
because people just are all the time being challenged to go ahead and put new things in the ecosystem. But you also have ecosystems connecting to other ecosystems, which I just find very interesting. Are there, you use that example early on about the marina, but are there other examples that you see in other industries that you've worked with that are ones you think would be just the aha moment for the food service industry?
I mean, there's a variety of them. We use the marine a lot because it's you've got ships floating in the middle of the ocean. Their network is the definition of inconsistent and unreliable. Where we do see a lot of food service has that problem as well. Many remote locations. What's the cost to send a truck with replacement parts in addition to the downtime you're experiencing, and sending a train tech with parts out to a store that's 4, 6, 8 hours away, having parts depots, things like that. And especially then if you're doing this point solutions where it's like, oh, wait, I need to have this part for the video system, which is different than the point of
Right.
sale system. So, all the benefits of unifying the platform, having a platform that has inherent resiliency, clustering, high availability built into it, that can heal itself. I mean, as an example, that ship in the middle of the ocean and, many of these remote stores, when, say, one of the nodes in our cluster dies, it's not a fire drill. You don't have to immediately get, that replaced. Your applications will keep up and running. You can wait a day or a couple days, or if you have built enough resiliency, you can wait till the ship comes into port, which is, what those customers often do. And, in a much more cost-effective way than, rolling trucks to every location, sending techs out every time there's a little glitch.
Well, I think that is a good example because in reality, we do have remote locations. I mean, not everything is centered around 20 major hubs,
Yes.
right? And the further you go out. So this is also a way to bring down maintenance and equipment costs as well, because of how you're going to deploy, and you can wait, to get something put out. But I think the other side of it is that this is also something that you're able to replace and put in some cases without having the tech come out. You just got to get the piece out.
Yeah, I mean, with the zero touch provisioning, which I think Mike mentioned, is not only on the initial deployment but on capacity expansion.
Ongoing.
It's a store manager can plug this in like a laptop. There's a network port and a power connection, and the system will show up, get configured, phone home to fleet manager, get its configuration. Hey, this node, you're joining this cluster. It all happens by itself. You now have more compute, more storage. You can deploy new applications. I mean, it is just that that automatic, and that's really a key for for these kinds of segments where you've got multiple locations without IT expertise, and you want them all set up in a particular way. I mean, we didn't really get into infrastructure as code and the way that you're deploying these in an automated way, avoiding human error, things like that. But that's a kind of another aspect that are things you would do in the cloud that we enable you to do across, a distributed.
Yeah, you don't really want to think about it. How many mistakes are made in deployment and putting in systems where somebody missed, something in the integration or how they were going to work or the setup.
Yeah.
Much better to use something, to, automatically sense it and be able to do that. And by the way, I don't want to miss on the AI sensing and repairs and the self-healing sort of, or the self actualization and understanding of when things may be going bad, because you can go ahead and time also your maintenance to do several things in one visit.
Yeah.
Especially if you've got IoT and you're connecting all your kitchen devices and your energy management and everything, rather than separate service calls, you anticipate and do something in advance.
Yep.
So there's a number of ways. I would just remind our audience that we've got about 15 minutes left. And if you've been pretty good actually about submitting some questions in our chat. So if you have some additional questions based on the conversation, please put them into the Q&A, and we will go ahead and address them as well. But I see you've put a new slide up here, and Gartner, okay. So what are they telling us here?
Yeah, are you taking this one, Mike, or?
Yeah. So basically, and it's funny, this is an iteration of a slide that we've had since like 2021, and the date was like by 2024, and more than 50% of the organizations will have some sort of edge computing, and that has actually come true. And really, what we're starting to see is a broader adoption. And Rob, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You gave an example of a C store adding in, a QSR, right? And it's all about revenue enablement. And what can we do to keep people here, and how are we going to support those initiatives, right? So that's an example where they would have to accommodate the food sensors, have to accommodate a kitchen display system. Others, as they're introducing electric vehicle charging stations, they're having other amenities to try and keep people there longer, right? And those are all going to require additional technologies. It's going to require new applications, something to drive that initiative. So being able to have a platform that can accommodate that is important. And that's really what edge computing is it's seeing that I have an opportunity to enable revenue and I have to have a platform that can accommodate that. It can't run into the data center. It can't run in the cloud. I have regulatory or other compliance issues, meaning that that data has to stay sovereign to me. And I don't want to deal with the unreliability of my internet connection or maybe not being able to fail over. So I need that there. And that's really what we've seen is that the edge computing deployments are taking shape because the technology has now reached a point where we can use small form factor devices. And probably more importantly, that is that we have the ability to manage these devices, manage these systems at scale. No pun intended, but when you're dealing with a large
Oh, I
scale
think there's pun
deployment,
intended all throughout this.
100%.
So we're all right.
But you don't want it to feel painful, right? You want it to feel like one cohesive deployment. And now that we can do that, and you can feel like you have control of your own on-prem private cloud, the interest is growing substantially.
Yeah, I mean, that really is, the point. By the way, I think you said that you've been using this slide for about 4 years. Has the 45% changed? Or do we change that for the next 3 years? Because I can tell you there's an awful lot more connected devices now, within the unit that we never thought were going to be part of the ecosystem of an operation.
It could be considerably higher. I mean, every time you see even the digital signage is now filtering down to like pricing, right? And tagging, where those are all e-paper-y that can be mass updated at once. There's another controller and a database that's cataloging and updating all those.
So do you envision let me ask the question a little bit differently, and this really goes back to the early slides that you showed at the beginning of this webinar, but what percent of inside the four walls today do you think is connected versus what might be in the next 3 to 4 years? I mean, not everybody replaces everything overnight. If it's a new build, maybe it's all connected in the new build, and maybe that's a question for Dave. But people have to transition. They upgrade every 4 to 5 years. So what percent as we go down do you think is actually all going to be connected?
Like
That's a great question.
Things like that. I mean, I think eventually it's going to approach 100%. But whoops, sorry. And but yeah, I think it's and probably some of the, as the devices are replaced, they're probably enabled already for, some kind of remote monitoring, but they may not have the infrastructure on the back end to be able to utilize all that. So but again, I think a lot of what we're seeing is actually driving it is these net new applications, a lot of the AI and so forth that weren't even necessarily conceived of even a few years ago.
Well, and people are coming up using AI, they're coming up with uses and things they didn't think about before. I believe that, the use of some of the video data, which you've been talking about, we've all got the cameras, they've been there forever. But that use of being able to look at it and use it for other things is very largely AI generated.
Yeah.
Because it's able to take what's there, recognize what it's seeing, and make recommendations, to it. And I always quote this, but somebody once told me in the last year that any device that has a screen on it, a digital screen on it, is probably connected, or it is connected.
Yeah.
And so when you just take a look around, your home, you take a look around your operation, everything from the thermostats to the, the fryers and the ovens and the walk-ins and everything, has got, and including, the drink dispensing machines, they all have, they're all connected. So you may be right. We could be at 100% or approaching 100%, especially in new builds. And then you got to factor in what, 125 to 150% when we're finally connecting all of our employees and our customers all together.
Yep. Yeah. And then the key is, the applications that are utilizing that information and, making value, generating value from that, from that information and making decisions and improving customer experiences and so forth.
No, I do think that I've asked this a couple of times, but I just want to make sure that we're clear on this. None of this is done totally on your own. Now, people who are operators in the industry are dealing with companies to go ahead and put other pieces of the infrastructure, the firewalls, the networks, and things in place. And you are a necessary piece of that. because people that do those types of things are probably not doing what you're doing, and you're partnering on it.
Right.
And then, of course, you have all the application providers that have to go through it. So you really fit to bring it all together. You're sort of like the connecting point, the train station, to bring everything in to one, no matter which points they are, and then, connect them on the outside.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, some of those partnerships are even taking, what might have been standalone network devices and virtualizing them. And so they're also, being consumed and running in, on our platform. We've mentioned video a lot in a lot of organizations. The video surveillance, video security is often a totally separate team outside of IT. And we're seeing that increasingly change because of the value of that data, because of
Go
the
look at the gaming industry.
yeah, because of the cost of maintaining those platforms and things like that. So, we're seeing kind of a unification of all those, IT related assets and infrastructure and so forth.
So where do you see, and this is a question for both of you, but since you talked about the unification, and I maybe use the word consolidation, where do you see the future unification in the next 3 or 4 years of software, but also where do you see, the unification in hardware?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can go lots of ways, but probably the key is, from it's important to centralize and unify the management layer. I mean, nobody, it's already difficult enough to manage tens or hundreds or thousands of sites. If they're all different or different piece parts or different, that makes it just exponentially more complex. So that's really where we've been addressing is how we can provide, Mike has said this several times, kind of that cloud-like experience. I mean, on the cloud, you don't care what the underlying hardware is. You just deploy your virtual machines, you deploy your containers, you deploy your applications, and you make certain assumptions there that the cloud provider is taking care of that. We want to provide, those same types of things that you can deploy whatever, you can lift and shift your existing applications. You can deploy your net new applications out there. You can do that quickly. You can assume automated resiliency where you don't have to, sit there and monitor, temperatures on the hardware that's sitting in the store, which is a common problem. We do that for you. We report those up through Fleet Manager, things like that. So I do think unifying the management piece is probably the key thing that needs to happen. And that includes the software, that includes the hardware and software. And we could go into a whole long thing about why we generally deliver this complete solution as a set of appliances with the software pre-integrated. We have other customers who do prefer to, use their own, and we work with them as well. But having that tight coupling of the entire solution from the fleet level view all the way out to the edge locations for that infrastructure, and then also the application deployment piece that we've talked about is really the key.
And Mike, do you see some do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that, specific, you mentioned, hardware, what do we see changing there? For the most part, we don't necessarily care about the hardware, but what I'm seeing, and I'll say, is that like the commodification of the server is happening where, more and more there's so very little to differentiate between a different vendor's, regular x86 server. And I think on the other side of that, the small form factor platform is being embraced as really a viable platform, where I think before it was dismissed as too disposable or too much of a commodity piece of hardware. But because of that, and because of both the resource density that we can get in those platforms, it's really enabling a lot of agility in being able to push and get adoption in the small form factor devices, and breaking away from the traditional one server, one application, one point solution deployment that's been in the field.
Yeah, so you really, are helping to bring it together, and those pieces are there. And again, do you think that, and I want to come back to the first question that was asked by one of our participants today, where does this actually go towards, security at the edge? Whose responsibility is it going to end up being? I mean, I guess it's a team effort there, but there are going to be impacts here. And you also are almost like I don't want, you're not the traffic cop, but you are also able through your tools to be able to see where there may be some holes in that and predict that as well.
Yeah, and
Yeah, and I
it's
think it.
inherent in the
Oh, go ahead.
platform. I mean, we, in like, for example, the zero touch provisioning use case, we know before that physical piece of hardware is spun up in a remote site and phones home, we have hardware identifiers, things like that, to make sure that that piece, when it, comes online in a store, connects back to Fleet Manager, that we know exactly what it is. It's validated, it's pre-configured. So you kind of, start from security right there. And then, the fact that our software stack is very, very locked down. It is, you just kind of get that, for free. I don't, I want to say, but you get that inherent in the platform, as opposed to you having to go and every new piece of hardware you bring, handle that yourself. And that also includes things like,
That takes a big headache off
yeah.
the table.
And then, things like patching and updates. We handle that for the infrastructure piece as well, from our software stack that's deployed on all the physical pieces of hardware to BIOS and firmware updates on the hardware itself as well. So again, that's part of that whole ecosystem play that, we're providing this centralized, secured, resilient platform and managing it through the Fleet Manager portal, as opposed to, you or somebody in your organization having to go and check a laundry list of things in every site and every layer, hardware, software yourself. That's just part of the overall platform solution that we provide.
Well, you really sit, at the center of, the circle, the wheel there of growth. Yeah, the center of growth. I think that's sort of an interesting thought there, that we are going to grow. We are going to get things that we don't really think about, as we head into the future. And, and we can't even plan for them because you just don't know. And it's not because of things like COVID that you can't plan for, but you also can't plan for, certain types of applications or certain types of problems or consumer demands or employee demands that instantly overnight require you to do something different, that's there. And so you really do have to be able to, move as quickly as the technology and the customers want you to. Plus, you can't even plan for, where and how you're going to be selling next year because of the new and innovative partnerships. And so you really do need to have almost like a plug and play solution that can help you to grow and add those pieces and add the applications as they come out in a very quick manner. And deployment, Mike, that's you again. But that deployment has to be fast as well in there because you got to keep up.
Yeah, I use the term deployment velocity a lot because it is important, and it's something that matters. Because sometimes you may be under, compliance rules. I need to accommodate a new platform. I need to be PCI compliant. I haven't been before, right? That might be an old one, but yeah, deployment velocity and being able to quickly and easily scale up your system deployment is important.
Hey, when management and leadership or your consumer decides they want something, they want it now. And so and they want it to be uniform, across, especially if you're a larger enterprise, they want it to be uniform, and come out all at once. And if you don't have something like this in place, that makes it impossible to be able to do, because now it's a staged, rollout and how you're going to go ahead and put that together. I do see on the slide, and I want to take notes in our last couple of minutes, there are a number of resources available to you. You can certainly scan any of these QR codes here. There's a white paper that's out that the IFBTA produced directly with Scale, and you'll see a video down there. Sort of looks like where we are right now. But that also talks a little bit more about their place in the industry, and then some use cases that we talk about. So we certainly would urge you to, you can either scan this, or this will be posted online at the IFBTA, and also Scale will put it out as well. We sort of run out of time here, so I do want to thank, first of all, for Scale for putting this together for us. It's a very important subject that we covered, and I'm not so sure that everybody realizes how important it is, and there's a lot of confusion in terminology. I think you guys really helped us with that. You're bringing our members to the edge of where they need to be, not the bleeding edge, but the leading edge of where they need to be. And what I got out of this, and Dave and Mike, I want to really thank you for each of you bringing your expertise into this. But here's the thought that I might leave you with, that at the end of the day, it is about being simple, it's being about scalable, and it's about being available. And as I think about that and put in real terms in the conversation we had today, and pun intended, Mike, pun intended, right? So scale,
Exactly.
if I'm using the right words here, and I think I got this straight, if they're working with you, or what they need to think about on the edge in the future is the ability to scale their connectivity, to scale up the applications they use, to scale up the number of hardware they use. And I don't just mean the infrastructure hardware and the digital signs, but it is going to be robotics. It is going to be vending down the road. And at the same time, at the end of the day, what does that mean? They're going to scale up the growth of the number of units and scale up their revenue, and they're going to scale down the expense and the simplicity of being able to manage it all. I don't know. You guys want to add anything to that? Because that's what I heard, and I want to thank you guys for bringing that forward to us today.
Yeah, no, that sounds perfect. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Rob.
And thank you to Scale for putting this together and being a very important industry partner of the IFBTA. And certainly for all of you for joining us today after the Thanksgiving holiday. And we hope you'll have a great season here, and you'll be hearing more about Scale and seeing them about as well as the IFBTA through the end of this year and into next year. So thank you for joining us.